The slap echoed so sharply through the diner that for a moment it felt as if time itself had flinched. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Forks hovered over plates. Even the low hum of conversation died instantly, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence that seemed to press against the walls of Miller's diner. Walter Hayes slowly turned his head back to center after the impact. The 72-year-old man blinked once, his weathered face absorbing the sting without a word. His silver hair peeked out beneath a faded military cap stitched with worn insignia that had survived decades of sun, rain, and memory. The skin on his cheek glowed red where the young man's hand had struck him. Walter didn't react the way the crowd expected. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a fist. Instead, he simply inhaled slowly through his nose and adjusted his glasses with a trembling hand. Across from him, Derek Cole leaned back in the booth with a smug grin spreading across his face. The 25-year-old was broad-shouldered and loud, his muscular arms covered in half-finished tattoos that crawled up toward his neck. His friends crowded around the booth with him, their laughter bouncing off the diner's tile floor. "Shut up, old man," Derek said, his voice thick with mockery. A couple of his buddies snorted. One of them had already pulled out his phone, recording. Walter stared quietly at the floor for a moment. His military cap lay there, tossed carelessly after Derek had snatched it from his head. The old man bent slowly to pick it up. His knees protested as he leaned forward, and the entire diner watched in silence as he carefully lifted the cap and brushed imaginary dust from its worn fabric. His hands shook, not from fear, from restraint. The truth was, Walter Hayes had lived long enough to understand something many people never learned. Anger was a weapon that could destroy the person holding it just as easily as the person it was aimed at. He placed the cap back on his head with quiet dignity. Derek scoffed loudly. "Look at this guy," he said, gesturing toward Walter as if presenting him to an audience. "Thinks he's some kind of hero just because he wore a uniform 50 years ago." More laughter rippled through the booth. Walter said nothing. He simply turned back toward the counter where his untouched slice of apple pie waited beside a cup of black coffee. He had come here for a quiet evening. That was all. For 30 years after retiring from the military, Walter had made a habit of small comforts, simple routines that helped him keep the memories of war in their proper place. A slice of pie at the diner, a slow drive through town, the soft murmur of strangers living ordinary lives. Peace had been hard-earned. He wasn't about to lose it to a drunk kid with something to prove. But Derek wasn't finished. "You hear me, Grandpa?" he pressed, leaning forward over the booth table. "You think wearing that hat makes you special?" Walter finally glanced at him. The old man's eyes were calm, steady, and impossibly tired. "No," Walter replied quietly. "It just reminds me of the men who never got to take theirs off." The line hung in the air for a second. For a brief moment, even Derek seemed unsure how to respond. Then he rolled his eyes dramatically. Yeah, war stories," he said dismissively. Before Walter could turn back to his pie, Derek suddenly reached out again, flicking the brim of the cap on Walter's head. The cap slipped off and hit the floor once more. Gasps scattered across the diner. Walter stared down at the fallen hat again. He bent slowly to retrieve it. And that was when Derek slapped him. Hard. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. For a second, nobody moved. A waitress froze mid-step near the kitchen door. An elderly couple in the corner stared in disbelief. Someone's phone camera trembled slightly as it kept recording. Walter's cheek burned, but he kept his balance. He simply stood there, breathing slowly. Humiliation washed through him, but he refused to let the young man see it. Then the front door of the diner swung open. The bell above it chimed softly. A woman stepped inside. She was tall, poised, and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. Her dark coat brushed against her knees as she paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room. Amanda Hayes had planned to surprise her father with dinner. Instead, the first thing she noticed was the silence. The second was the look on Walter's face. Her eyes landed on the red mark across his cheek. For a moment, Amanda didn't move. Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She walked forward slowly, her heels clicking against the tile floor. "Dad," she said softly. Walter turned. The moment he saw her, his shoulders sagged slightly. "Amanda," he murmured. She stopped beside him, studying his face carefully. "Who did this?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but there was something in it that made Sevra. When she pulled out the badge, the room inhaled collectively. The gold shield glinted under the diner lights. "Actually," Amanda said calmly, "this is very much my business." Derek squinted at the badge. "What the hell is that supposed to—" His voice faltered as he read it. "Director, Department of Homeland Security, Amanda Hayes." The smirk drained from his face so quickly it was almost painful to watch. His friends lowered their phones. One of them whispered, "Dude." Amanda held Derek's gaze. "You didn't just assault a veteran," she said quietly. Her voice carried through the silent diner with surgical precision. "You assaulted my father." Derek blinked rapidly. I didn't know," he stammered. "He's just some old—" Amanda stepped closer. "A man who fought so you could sit here laughing," she interrupted. The weight of her words settled over the diner like gravity. Walter looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Amanda noticed. Her expression softened slightly as she turned to him. "Dad," she said gently. "I didn't want trouble," Walter murmured. "I know," she replied. Then she turned back to the diner manager. "Call local police," Amanda said calmly. The manager nodded immediately, already reaching for the phone. Derek suddenly looked much smaller sitting in the booth. His earlier bravado had evaporated completely. "Look, I didn't mean anything," he said quickly. "It was just a joke." Amanda tilted her head slightly. "You slapped a 72-year-old veteran," she replied, "on camera." As if on cue, several customers raised their phones again. Reality crashed down on Derek all at once. "Oh my God," one of his friends muttered. The wail of distant sirens began to grow outside. Walter shifted uncomfortably. "Amanda," he said quietly, "maybe we should just leave." She looked at him for a moment. There was so much love in her eyes that several people watching felt an unexpected lump in their throats. "You spent your life standing up for people who couldn't defend themselves," she said softly. He didn't respond. "Tonight," she continued, "someone gets to do that for you." A few minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers stepped inside, immediately sensing the tension in the room. Amanda spoke with them briefly, showing identification. Derek was pale now. As the officers approached him, his earlier confidence had completely collapsed. "Sir," one officer said firmly, "stand up." Derek obeyed slowly. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The diner watched silently as he was escorted toward the door. The same room that had laughed minutes earlier now felt heavy with shame. One by one, Derek's friends slipped out behind him, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When the door closed behind the officers, the silence lingered. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly man at the counter stood up. He walked over to Walter and extended his hand. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly. Walter blinked, surprised. Another customer approached, then another. Soon a small line formed. People shook his hand. Some simply nodded with quiet respect. The waitress who had frozen earlier wiped her eyes before bringing Walter a fresh slice of pie on the house. Amanda gently lifted the military cap from the counter where Walter had set it. She brushed the brim with her thumb and carefully placed it back on his head. It sat slightly crooked, just the way he always wore it. Walter looked around the diner in disbelief. "I really didn't want all this," he said quietly. Amanda smiled softly. "Sometimes standing up isn't about wanting attention," she replied. He looked at her. "It's about reminding people what respect looks like." Walter studied his daughter for a long moment. He remembered the little girl who used to wait by the window when he came home from deployments. Now she stood before him, strong, fearless, protecting him the way he had once protected her. Pride swelled quietly in his chest. For the first time that night, Walter Hayes smiled, and around them, the entire diner stood and applauded,